I'm really excited to start this interview of the author of Escape from the Czar. Welcome to your interview, Paula. Can you introduce yourself or share a little bit about yourself?
Okay, sure. Thank you so much for having this interview. My name is Paula Bilyieu Velho, and I was raised in New York. I live in Central Florida now. I have a BA degree in French and English. I was a teacher for 15 years, and now I am mostly full-time writing books. I have 2 children and 2 grandchildren.
Well, you could have fooled me. You don't look like someone that has 2 grandchildren. Paula, can you tell us a little bit about the book and why did you choose this setting?
I'd be happy to. My book, Escape from the Czar, is a novella, which means that it's less than 100 pages. It is a love story. It's also a war tale. And the war was in 1904, 1905. It was the Russian-Japanese War. My book begins in 1889, and at that time there was no Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Belarus, or Ukraine. It was all just the Imperial Russian Empire. I've always been fascinated with Russian history, and especially since it was a small settlement in Kiev through the 300 years of the Romanov Tsars. My book begins in 1889. And at that time, the serfs or peasants had been freed for about 25 years. They were actually freed in 1861, but they were free without land. So they only could be farmers for the nobility. And that's where the story in my book begins.
And what inspired you, or how did you come up with the title?
I came up with the title because it kind of came together when I was designing the cover. I put a train on the front cover, and the tracks represent the Trans-Siberian Railroad that was completed just a few years before the setting of my book. But the train is going away from Vladivostok towards the west. So it just seemed a natural evolution to put Escape from the Czar as my title.
I love it. I love the pictures and the title as well. How long did it take you to write it?
That's a difficult question because I began my research many years ago and kind of put it aside. Then during the pandemic, when I was isolated in the house, it was a perfect time to be writing full time. My preferred time of writing was in the evening. I usually wrote about 3 hours a day. My manuscript was completed in October 2021.
And aside from what you mentioned, was there a most challenging part of writing?
For me, I think the whole writing aspect was the most challenging. After the research, then it was the grammar, the punctuation, writing the conversations, making sure that everything makes sense, and then the revisions and the rewrites. But it always seemed that something else had to be done, such as doing the cover, making a design for the cover, and then I wanted to add a poem by Pushkin, which is a famous Russian poet, and then I put in the words for the song Dark Eyes. So it seemed like it was never done until it really was done.
And what is your favorite part of the book?
Okay, I have many favorite parts, but the part that I'm going to tell about is when Pavilis, who is my main character, who's also modeled on my grandfather, is walking through the beautiful woods in Russia, and he hears the song of the nightingale, and he regards that as a very good omen. And he goes to this barn dance, and he meets Sophie, and he falls madly in love with her right away. He asks for her hand in marriage, from Sophie's father, and he was rebuffed immediately by saying, our custom is that the oldest daughter, who is Pauline, she's 19, she needs to be married first, and Sophie's only 16. So Pavilla said, well, I'm going to be on my way then. Not wanting to lose an eligible suitor, the father went over to confer with his wife and came back and said, it's okay, we're going to forget custom in this case, and you can wed Sophie.
Now, I know you shared some parts of the book. Do you have any favorite characters and why?
Well, sure. I think my favorite character is my grandfather, and his name is Pavillus, and he is the protagonist of the story. I like him because he's very inspirational. He has a lot of courage. He has faith. He was also a modern man in that he regarded education as a way to get ahead. My female characters in the book are really not that well developed as the male character. It's more his story.
What inspired you to write?
Oh, that's a great question. What inspired me to write this book was in 1999, in my mother's belongings, I found a magazine that had my grandfather's picture on the front. I recognized it was him because we had a portrait of him in our living room. So I looked in the magazine, I realized it was written in Lithuanian. Now, if you speak Russian or read Russian, it doesn't mean that you can speak or read Lithuanian, because Lithuanian is a very, very old language. But I was able to find somebody in Brooklyn who was able to translate it for me. And 6 months later, I got the English translation back. And what it was an interview with my grandfather when he was 65 years old. So I found out that my great-grandparents' names really were Tekel and Kazimirius. But more importantly, I found out what my grandfather's views on the coming revolution were. So without this magazine and the translation, I doubt I ever would have written this book. So that's what inspired me.
That's a lovely story. What was the journey of writing like for you?
The journey of writing for me was like, as Stephen King once wrote, the craft of writing is both generous and self-centered. When I started the book, it was just going to be a story to share with my family. But as I got into it and I became more introspective, I began to focus on if I had the patience and the intelligence to complete a book. But overall, the journey of writing for me was a pleasant one.
Lovely. Can you share with us some of your like your writing process? What does your schedule to write look like?
Honestly, I don't have a schedule to write. I have plenty of time to write if I feel like writing in the morning or in the evening. But for me, my preferred time of writing is in the evening after dinner. And I like to write for about 3 hours, but I don't count the minutes or the hours that I write.
What does literary success mean to you?
That's a very important question. Literary success for me as a storyteller means that I was able to tell the story of my grandparents' escape from Imperial Russia. My grandfather faced a lot of fear. Often he had to ride around in carts in Russia without permission papers. He also, when he was approached by the Russian government because of his knowledge in metallurgy, he didn't want to go to Vladivostok, but he was afraid what would happen to his family if he didn't go. So he decided that he would go. And I think the main fear that he had was coming back on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. He saw the beginnings of the Russian Revolution, and that prompted the greatest fear that he had. And for me, being able to tell the story was literary success for me.
And what advice would you give to young people?
Okay. J.K. Rowling says to read. Now, I also say go to movies because you can see what works in a movie and what doesn't work. I also suggest carrying a little notebook around where you can write down ideas. The good ones usually last. And then finally, if you're going to write, you write about what you know and what you care about. And that would be my advice.
I think that's great advice. And Paula, what do you think of Bookmark Alliance?
Well, Bookmark Alliance found me, and I was very, very happy that they did. They have great exposure for an author to promote their book. They have the bookstore in California. Then they also have this opportunity for me to present at Frankfurt Book Fair and also to do this literary interview. So I think that the people were so encouraging and so positive that I would recommend Bookmark Alliance very heartily for anybody.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Paula. This was a great interview. I'm looking forward to finishing Escape from the Czar.
Well, thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about my book. It was my pleasure, and I hope you have a great day.
You too.
Thank you.